Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the incredible story of Norway, a journey that spans centuries from soaring ambition to devastating decline, and finally to one of the most remarkable national transformations you'll ever see. So how do we answer that? Well, we've got to go way, way back, more than 1,000 years actually, to a time when Norwegian ships and the warriors on board were probably the most feared sight on any sea. Okay, let's start in the 8th century. And look, this wasn't just about raw aggression, it was a total technological revolution. They developed the longship, which was just a masterpiece of engineering. It was so brilliantly designed with its shallow bottom and symmetrical shape that it could sail up shallow rivers just as easily as it crossed wide open oceans. This single innovation, plus some seriously unmatched navigation skills, kicked off an era of raiding, trading, and colonizing like nothing the world had seen before. Okay, so what's wild about this is just how fast and how far they went. That first raid on the poor, defenseless monastery at Lindisfarne, it sent a shockwave across all of Christian Europe. But that was just the opening act. See, they weren't just raiders. They were builders, founding the city of Dublin and turning it into a vital trade hub. Meanwhile, back home, all this expansion led to huge conflicts like the brutal Battle of Hafrsfjord, which was the beginning of the bloody process of uniting all of Norway's little kingdoms. Their ambition was just boundless. I mean, you have Eric the Red leading settlers across the treacherous North Atlantic to colonize the massive icy expanse of Greenland. So, for centuries, Norway was a huge deal, its influence stretching all across a North Atlantic empire. But that golden age, which was built on their strength at sea and a growing population, was about to come to a screeching halt. And not just an end, but a truly catastrophic one. The kingdom's very foundations were about to be washed away. Just think about that. One single year. 1349. This is the moment it all goes wrong for Norway. It's the year a single ship would bring something so devastating that it would send the entire nation into a downward spiral that lasted for half a millennium. You know, it's almost impossible for us to imagine how awful this was. The legend says it all arrived on a single English trading ship that docked in Bergen. A few years later, 2/3 of the population was just gone. Entire valleys were left empty, farms swallowed back up by the forest, the aristocracy, the clergy, basically the pillars of the state, they were decimated. Tax money just dried up, there was a critical loss of skilled people to run things, and the kingdom was simply too broken to govern itself, let alone project any kind of power. And this slide shows you exactly what happened next, politically speaking. By 1397, a desperately weakened Norway joined the Kalmar Union, a pact that was supposed to unify Scandinavia against German expansion. But when Sweden eventually bailed, Norway was left in this really lopsided union with a much more powerful Denmark. Over time, it was slowly downgraded from a kingdom to just another province, ruled from Copenhagen. Its language was suppressed, its resources were taken, and its voice in its own affairs was almost completely silenced for 400 years. But you know, even centuries of being ruled by someone else couldn't completely extinguish that Norwegian spirit. So let's jump forward to the early 19th century and see how the chaos of a massive European war created a totally unexpected chance for a new chapter of defiance. So the Napoleonic Wars are raging across Europe, and Denmark-Norway is trying its absolute best to stay neutral. But it was pretty much an impossible position. After the British launched a surprise attack and just seized the entire Danish-Norwegian fleet in Copenhagen, the kingdom was forced into an alliance with Napoleon. And that decision? It was a disaster. The British Royal Navy blockaded the coast, cutting off crucial grain imports and strangling the economy. It led to mass famine, a time still remembered in Norway as the bark bread years. So, after Napoleon is finally defeated, the victorious powers get together to redraw the map of Europe. And what happens? Well, as punishment for siding with France, Denmark is forced to hand Norway over to Sweden, almost like a piece of property being traded between kings. But after centuries of being pushed around, the Norwegian people just refused to be a bargaining chip in some great game of empires. A small window of opportunity had opened, and they were about to smash right through it. And this is the really crucial part, this incredible moment of national defiance. In the spring of 1814, representatives from all over the country gathered at a place called Eidsvoll, and in just 6 weeks, they drafted one of the most liberal and democratic constitutions in the entire world at the time. Now, after a brief war with Sweden that summer, they were forced into a new union, but they won a huge concession. Norway got to keep its new constitution and its own parliament. So even though they had a foreign king, they now had their own laws. So, with its own constitution and parliament, this new sense of what it meant to be Norwegian really started to bubble up throughout the 19th century. After nearly 100 years of a pretty uneasy partnership, the Norwegian parliament in 1905 voted unanimously to just dissolve the union. There was a referendum, the people voted overwhelmingly for independence, and Sweden, in a really remarkable act of statesmanship, peacefully agreed. For the first time in over 500 years, Norway was finally its own master again. All right, so they're finally independent, but that didn't mean it was smooth sailing from there. The 20th century was about to throw some major tests at this new nation's resolve. In World War I, they got this nickname, the Neutral Ally. See, their massive merchant fleet was absolutely vital for supplying Britain, but it came at a horrible cost, as German U-boats sank half their ships. In World War II, trying to be neutral failed completely. Germany invaded to get strategic access to the Atlantic, but King Haakon VII's defiant refusal to surrender became a rallying cry for 5 long years of occupation and resistance. These trials really forged a modern identity of resilience and ended Norway's long history of neutrality, leading it to become a founding member of NATO. Okay, so after the war, Norway rebuilds. It's a stable, pretty well-off country. But then, in the middle of the 20th century, something is discovered off its coast that is going to fundamentally alter its destiny, forever. The year is 1969. For years, companies had been drilling in the rough North Sea, coming up with absolutely nothing. A lot of people thought it was a lost cause. But then, the American company Phillips Petroleum hits the jackpot. They discover the Ekofisk oil field, one of the largest offshore fields ever found. And just like that, Norway was on the path to becoming an energy superpower. And this chart really gives you a sense of just how massive that change was. Suddenly, oil and gas make up a fifth of the entire national economy, bringing in a stream of wealth like they'd never seen. And while their traditional industries were still strong, this discovery completely changed Norway's place in the world, turning it from a nation of fishermen and shipbuilders into a major global energy exporter. But look, finding the oil, that's only half the story. I mean, plenty of countries get rich off oil and then just blow it all on short-term projects or let it enrich a tiny few. What makes Norway's story so incredible is what its leaders and its people chose to do with all that money. Right from the very beginning, in the early 1970s, this was the core idea they agreed on in Parliament. This wasn't some resource to be exploited for the benefit of a few corporations or a small elite. No, this was a national inheritance. The wealth that came from the North Sea would be managed for the long-term benefit of the entire nation, including generations that weren't even born yet. And so, they created what we now know as the Government Pension Fund. Instead of just flooding their own economy with cash, which can cause all sorts of problems, they made a conscious decision to invest the surplus money abroad into a massive global fund. It's really a stunning example of long-term thinking, a direct lesson learned from a turbulent history of boom and bust, and a collective decision to not repeat the mistakes of the past. And the result? It's just staggering. Today, Norway's sovereign wealth fund is the largest in the world, valued at well over $1 trillion. To put that into perspective for you, the fund owns on average 1.5% of every single publicly listed company on the planet. It is a financial safety net of unimaginable scale, a modern fortress built not of stone, but of shared wealth and incredible foresight. So you go from Viking marauders to a subjugated province, from a defiant young nation to a global vanguard of sustainable wealth management. It's an incredible story of resilience. But the very fund that secures their future was built on a finite resource. So the great challenge now is how to use that security to innovate for a post-oil world. It's a question that not only defines Norway's future, but also offers some pretty profound lessons for nations everywhere.